Hello to all my fellow alumni. I wish I could be with you guys at homecoming this year. Unfortunately, or fortunately, my wife and I are out doing some mountain climbing. Hopefully, we'll be able to be with you next year. In the meantime, hopefully, this presentation will be very educational and informative for you. So, we have this issue in the United States where we are getting older. Into the 2030s, more than 1 in 5 of us will be above the age of 65. That's a lot of senior citizens. And we have this issue where we are now seem to be capped out on longevity, whereas for most of my career, we could say, boy, we're living longer and longer lives. That just is not the case anymore. We are kind of on the way back down again in terms of lifespan compared to other industrialized nations. And the issue seems to be highlighted pretty well by these think tanks from Harvard that suggest that we provide amazing acute care, amazing heroic care, but we really have a major problem with the quality of our health care. So you can see here on these slides that this trend started really in the 1980s, early 1990s, where lifespan in the United States started to fall out from the rest of the industrialized country. And this is despite the graph on the right that shows that we just throw more and more money at this situation. Despite $4.1 trillion of spending per year, we now have a tremendous burden of chronic health care in the United States. About 6 in 10 adults have at least one chronic health condition, and a staggering 2 out of every 10 adults have 6 or more chronic health conditions. And when you think about it, a large percentage of these chronic diseases are very lifestyle driven. This is a very short list of the most common factors: tobacco abuse, poor diet, physical inactivity, excess alcohol use, uncontrolled high blood pressure, dyslipidemia. And here's what they all have in common. All of these are lifestyle driven, and all of these have very effective remedies. Now, in case you don't believe that statistic, I would offer up this slide from the American Heart Association that I just absolutely love. And so what we're measuring here is incidence of coronary artery disease risk based on these two axes: the number of ideal health behaviors and number of ideal health factors. So let's consider this, if you don't mind. So what if you have all the best health behaviors and you have all the ideal health factors, so normal blood pressure, normal blood sugar, normalized cholesterol? Then it makes pretty good sense. You're going to have the very lowest risk or incidence of coronary artery disease. Makes perfectly good sense. Well, what if you have none of the ideal health factors and you have none of the ideal health behaviors? Well, that makes sense. You probably are going to have the very highest risk of coronary artery disease. All very commonsensical. But ponder this. What if you're like me? What if you have a family history of coronary artery disease and, in fact, have a little bit of non-obstructive coronary artery disease? Thanks, Dad. And maybe a little autoimmune diabetes. Thanks, Mom. So I don't have all of the ideal health factors. Maybe I'm somewhere down here. Well, but I have all of the best health behaviors. So my risk of worsening coronary artery disease or incidence is around here. Well, what if I have all the best genes? I've got all of the best health factors. I just won the lottery on genes, but I have the very worst health habits, the worst health behaviors. My risk is going to be somewhere in this ballpark. So which would you rather have? Would you rather have the best genes with the worst habits, or would you rather have crappy genes and the best habits? I'm banking on my good habits to counterbalance my bad genetics. So I think that for most of us and for most of our patients, we really kind of think about aging and function uh, in regard to like birthdays. Birthdays are toxic. As you stack them up, you start to lose function, and that's just inevitable. Nothing can be done about that. And I think that that whole idea of aging equals less function is really a flawed model. There's some yes to that, but I also think that there's a fair amount of no to that as well. And I would present to you the learnings of the blue zones. So, for those of you who aren't in the know, which I suspect probably isn't many of you, we've known for about 30 years now that there are these areas in the world that host people who get to extreme old age with extreme good health. So, people in these blue zones areas tend to live into their hundreds at a rate of around 3 times the average for other populations, and they tend to have very vigorous health. They're living autonomously, they're riding horses and bicycles, they're active in their communities, and so they have a very vigorous long life. And we've been studying this phenomenon for 30 years, trying to decide what drives this phenomenon. And after more than 20, 30 years of evaluation, it didn't really turn out to be the genetics. It didn't turn out to be an amazing mineral count in the water. It turned out to be these things: uh, a primarily a whole food plant-based diet, very simple, non-processed diet, uh, moderate but constant physical activity, a lot of interaction socially and with family, less exposure to toxins. These are really the biggest things that contribute to robust, long, healthy lives for human beings. So when you think about that concept of the blue zones compared to standard of care, this graph I think really describes how I see the situation. So in standard of care, we can slow very slightly the decline of our overall function. But at a certain point, we hit this slippery slope where we fall off. And we get to what I call the marginal decade. So this is that last 8, 10 years of our life where, yeah, we're not dead. The medications definitely kept us above ground, but we're so below a level of acceptable function that I think you really have to have a real conversation about, is this of benefit to people? And what we want is the blue zones effect. We want to have people with a tremendously robust health span that lasts them throughout the course of their life, and then a nice quick descent into demise at the very end. I think this is way preferable for almost anybody who's ever thought about this with a clear head. We want to live better, we want to live longer. So maintaining function while we age, yeah, it does have a genetic component, but that's only one of many variables. Lifestyle choices are key. Access to good health care is a powerful tool as well. And then, of course, environmental factors. So there's a lot of choices that we and our patients can make that are going to help provide that higher quality of life for a population that is rapidly graying. And so the American College of Lifestyle Medicine has come into its own. It's about 20 years since it was founded, and it's based on these 6 pillars of lifestyle management. So wonderful nutrition, constant physical activity, stress management, avoiding risky substances, good social connections, and restorative sleep. If that looks a lot like the Blue Zones information, you're exactly right. A lot of what the American College of Lifestyle Medicine was founded on was the concepts that came from these Blue Zones research. So let's talk about 2 of those pillars. We're going to talk about exercise, and we're going to talk about the benefits of nutrition as it applies to functional aging today. So let's have a conversation about cardiopulmonary function and cardiopulmonary health. So I pulled this from Medscape in 2023. It was beginnings of a conversation about how geriatricians are now recommending VO2 max evaluations for their older patients. And here's why you should be if you're not. So when I'm talking to patients, I'm trying to describe to them what VO2 max is. I frequently talk in terms of engines and engine power. We know as we sit here at the conference that our tidal volume is way less than our total pulmonary capacity. And same thing with our heart. We may be sitting here with a heart rate of 60 to 80, but we know we could hit the 150s, 200s if we really needed to. Well, that concept of how much power could we put out, how much sustained output from our engine is kind of gets at what VO2 max is all about. So frequently I describe to my patients, it's almost like, when you're a teenager and a 20-year-old, you're a 12-cylinder Lamborghini, but somehow by the time you're 50 or 60, you're a 3-cylinder Geo Metro. And of course, VO2 max measurements came to us from the athletic world where they were looking at athletic performance. And I think that that's very important. I'm out mountain climbing today, and so obviously performance is important to me. But from an internal medicine perspective, here's why it's important to all of us. As you look at a study like this, where we're measuring survival probabilities over a decade, looking at quintiles of VO2 max, the people with the very best VO2 max have a 5-fold improvement in all-cause mortality compared to people with the very lowest VO2 max. And so these people down here are walking around very fragile in a very dangerous world, and they just don't have the reserve to stay out of trouble. So here's a VO2 max on one of my patients. I do a lot of these in my office, and this is the patient that I'm looking for. So this is a 62-year-old gentleman who came to see me post-COVID. He'd really struggled with his illness. He had spent a lot of time in ICU and then ultimately rehab. And what you can see with the VO2 max at 26.0, he's that 5th quintile guy. So for his age, he's way down there. This is the guy whose all-cause mortality is just sky high. But here's the thing, there are great studies looking at our ability to improve VO2 max. So this is a meta-analysis looking at seniors age 70 or older. And what you find when you look at these 12 meta-analyses, sorry that my big goofy head's in the way here, but I'll give you the punchline. They were all strongly positive for the ability of seniors to improve overall VO2 max. And upwards of a 30% increase in VO2 max is there for the taking for senior citizens who get the right kinds of therapy, which of course is high interval intense training. And so high heart rate training is what I prescribe to these patients. So just because they're in their 70s, 80s, or beyond, doesn't mean that their VO2 max and overall functionality has to stay diminished. For example, here's a guy, Robert Marchand, who in this picture is 104 and was a competitive bicyclist. He competed to about 104, retired at 105, and very early into 106 passed away. So here's a guy who, through training, had a very vigorous lifestyle all the way up into his early 100s. I don't know what his VO2 max is. I'm betting it's probably better than mine was, or pretty close, I hope. So I think that this is a good example of a person who, through training and exercise, is able to keep a very robust cardiovascular health. So switching gears just a little bit here, I want to talk a little bit about dementia risks and activities, impacts on that. And so this slide in the back is pointing out that in the blue bars are the Americas. By somewhere in our 80s, almost 1 in 3 Americans will have likely dementia. And if you're lucky enough to live into your 90s, that number is more than 1 out of every 2, which is a pretty shocking number. And of course, when you look at AARP data, retirees are most concerned about Alzheimer's dementia. I totally get that. This is one of those things that I am well known for fearing. Dementia and strokes really are a killer on lifestyle and quality of life, and I understand why people have a strong concern about developing dementia. And I think that here's some really interesting things that we need to know. Dementia risk is strongly associated with lifestyle. So these are 2 different studies over, I want to say, around a 6-year period of time, looking at a number of healthy lifestyle factors and risk of developing dementia. And what you can see as you go from minimal health factors to the most health factors, you see the most benefit in primary prevention of dementia. So lifestyle is very strongly related, not to our genetic risk as much as it is to the lifestyles that we adopt. And so here's a hodgepodge of just little Alzheimer's factoids to throw at your patients. And nutrition has been linked to a 53% potential reduction in Alzheimer's. Exercise can reduce risk by 40%. Stress management can protect against brain atrophy by 30%. Sleep is tremendous. Boy, so many connections to dementia risk. 70% decline in risk for having restorative regular sleep patterns. And then mental and social activity reduces Alzheimer's risk by about 48%. So, well, this is a powerful cocktail. And when you look at different agencies measuring this risk, you know, they'll quote that somewhere between 40 and 80% of all dementia risk is avoidable, which I think is a powerful message to take back to our patients. And here's probably part of the reason for that. The heart and brain are connected. Anything that turns out to be good for our hearts is also good for our heads. And if you're thinking, nope, I don't believe that, I offer you this horrible picture. So this is a study looking at intracranial atherosclerosis in Alzheimer's dementia patients. And though we may not all be pathologists in the room, I bet all of us can point to the blood vessels that we would rather look like ours. So as you can see, the people with Alzheimer's have tremendous more atheroma burden than you would think. And this is not dissimilar to the driving factors in our coronary artery disease. So anything that you do as a net good for your coronary artery disease is going to be a net good for the health of your brain as well. So I had said that lifestyle is a pretty powerful preventative. So primary prevention and dementia, those things are tightly linked. So the Finger study came out in 2015 and looked at people who were at risk of dementia and did not currently meet the criteria for dementia. So they were all older, between the ages of 60s and late 70s. All were felt to have a high risk. However, were still cognitively normal at time of study. It was a 2-year evaluation. Half of the patients were put on a very aggressive lifestyle regime, including dietary changes, exercise, cognitive training, social activities, and then disease management. And then, of course, there was that control group that they just observed. And here's the thing. There was a 40% reduction in dementia risk, which I've already told you, the lifestyle is tied to that. But here's an interesting clue that got my attention. There was a 25% improvement in cognitive function over baseline. So even though these people were still measured at cognitively normal coming into the study, with aggressive lifestyle changes, those people were actually able to improve their overall cognitive function, which I think is a pretty exciting idea because we have always said that dementia goes in one direction. It's a chronic, progressive atrophy of cognitive function, and that's how it goes. That's been the party line for my entire career, but the Finger study in 2015, or Finnish geriatric study, suggested that, well, maybe we can reverse the direction on that disease process. So here's a study looking at VO2 max as it relates to brain volumes and cognitive function. And so the slide here on the left is showing that cognitive reserve function, or VO2 max, as you go through your birthdays, the people with the highest VO2 max end up with the highest brain volume. So we're mitigating brain atrophy. And because of that, this is a measurement of cognitive function. Over time, the people with the highest VO2 max also have the highest cognitive function as well. So not only do you get a bigger engine and more like a Lamborghini, but I guess you get a bigger computer between your ears too. So that's two birds, one stone. So it seems like maybe lifestyle interventions can prevent cognitive function declines, and lifestyle can maybe even improve people who are on the slippery slope. What about people with dementia? So this is a very new study that came out in 2024, so just June, hot off the press, really, guys. This is from Dean Ornish, looking at the effects of aggressive lifestyle changes on people who were already diagnosed with early dementia. So this was a randomized, controlled, double-blinded study. It ran 20 weeks. I guess maybe was not double-blinded. My apologies. It was random controlled. Involved people between the ages of 45 and 90 who were already diagnosed with early dementia with a Montreal Cognitive Assessment score of 18 or higher, which 18 is pretty low in my opinion. Here's what they did. They put the study participants on an aggressive intervention, including basically a whole food plant-based diet, controlled exercise regime, social connectivity groups, mental hygiene and relaxation techniques, and then a handful of supplements that had all been independently studied and found to be beneficial in terms of cognitive function, such as B12, thiamine, that sort of thing, vitamin D. And here's what they found. So in the control group, as you would predict, over 20 weeks, the control group just had continuously progressing dementia findings, which, hey, that's party line. We've said it for 20 plus years. If you got dementia, it's going to get worse. That's how it goes. In the intervention group, however, what they found was improvement. These people showed considerable improvement. So in the intervention group, 71% of the patients improved or were unchanged. None of the patients in the control group improved, and 68% of them worsened. And this wasn't just in overall cognitive assessment. This was also in Alzheimer's biomarkers as well. So though this was a very small pilot study, this is also the very first study that shows that we can intervene in people with dementia and improve function, which I think is an exciting time to be in the preventative neurology sphere, because this is really exciting, especially when you consider how many of us are about to be above the age of 65. All right, well, let's talk about aging and strength and physical activity as we're in the conference or climbing our mountain. We want to have that really high health span. So one thing that we all deal with, and I deal with a lot in my clinic, is sarcopenia. You know, the average American adult loses about 30% of their muscle mass from age 35 to 65. And of course, that comes with a considerable decline in physical ability. And it's not just their functional ability, but it's also their ability to survive. So the PURE study looked at survivability in patients with these active disease processes: myocardial infarction, stroke, cancers, respiratory diseases, pneumonia, and then back here, fractures. The green bars are the patients with the strongest grip strength. The blue bars are the people with the weakest grip strength. And consistently, what we find from all-cause mortality, the people with the least amount of strength are the most likely to die from any cause, which I don't think is should be that revelatory. You know, if a lack of strength is the same as frailty, saying the more frail you are, the less likely you are to survive a challenge, I think that that's kind of what the PURE study is trying to get us to focus on. And so this is probably one of my favorite studies, looking at long-term impacts of strength training on muscle strength characteristics in older adults. And so let me kind of walk you through this graph, because boy, this really inspires me. So this was a study looking at two groups, a intervention and a control group. Both measured baseline strength characteristics in an elderly population. And then what they did with the intervention group was they got a trainer and free ticket to the gym, and they worked out for a year. Whereas the control group basically went about just daily activities unchanged. And what you can see is that over that year's time, the intervention group gained a considerable amount of strength compared to both baseline and the control group. But then at the end of year one, the study no longer had an active phase, and they took away the gym memberships, they took away the trainer, and they said, that's it, go home, and we're just going to follow you on a yearly basis to see what happens to your strength. And as you would probably predict, strength began to decline every year, worse and worse and worse. But here is the important point. For a 1-year investment in strength training, the intervention group was forever stronger than the control group. So 1 year worth of effort and investment in strength training netted them 7 years in always being stronger than the control. So I think that that is such a great example of why any little bit that we do or that our patients can do is going to pay off. You know, the less frail you are over a decade, the more functional you're going to be. The more you get to play with your grandbabies, the more you get to go on vacations and do activities that please you. And of course, then there's the mortality. You know, that's what the PURE trial was trying to point out, that we want to stay as strong as we can because that's what keeps us on the planet the longest. So here's an example of that. This is Charles Eugster. He's my hero. So Charles was a dentist in England who really had a pretty sedentary life, did not start exercising until he was in his late 60s, and then somehow ended up becoming a very competitive elderly athlete, getting a bunch of gold medals for a bunch of different events. And here he is water skiing in his 80s or 90s. I'm pretty sure I can't water ski in my 50s and 40s. So, you know, this guy's impressive. And of course, you know, here's my favorite saying from Charles. You see, the stupid thing is that people don't realize that you can have a beach bod at 90 and turn the heads of those sexy 70-year-old girls on the beach. I'm living proof that if you eat right and exercise properly, you can be that guy at any age. And well, I think that that's the right message for us to be sending to our patients. All right, well, let's talk about a different pillar. Let's look at what science can tell us about dietary interventions and cardiovascular health. So here's an interesting fact for you. An adult eats about 800 pounds of food per year. So by the time you and I are 80, we've eaten somewhere around 80,000 pounds of food. That's a big number when you think about it. It's a lot of food. And of course, the quality of that food and its impact on our overall health is going to be a tremendous way factor in how healthy are we and how functional we are. So this one caught my eye. This is from Neurology, which is the most widely read and highly cited of the peer-reviewed neurology journals. So associations between ultra-processed food consumption and adverse brain health outcomes. What this study showed is that, and the punchline is this, a 10% increase in relative intake of ultra-processed foods were associated with a 16% higher risk of cognitive impairment. The more ultra-processed foods we eat, the more cognitive impairment we're likely to suffer, which is tremendously distressing to think about when we realize that about 73% of the American food supply is now ultra-processed. And so it's a pretty well studied phenomenon that about 70% of every calorie that Americans put in their mouth and consume are now ultra-processed. And of course, we're on track by 2035 for the preponderance. 51% of the world's population will be at least overweight by then if trends continue as they are. So we have a tremendous nutrition problem, not just in our country, but in most countries. And I don't think that this crowd needs to be shown this slide, but we're not talking about an aesthetic. As BMI raises, mortality rates rise. So you can be too skinny and get a mortality rate, but as our BMI rises, whether you're a man or woman, your mortality rate is climbing because of it. So this is a study looking at just nutritional patterns and overall survival probability over about a 5-year period of time. And basically all they did was take somewhere around 17,000 people, divided up their food intake habits into patterns. So the green one is more a Mediterranean whole food plant-based. The red line here is more of a southern diet, which is characterized by added fats, fried foods, eggs, organ processed meats, sugar sweetened beverages, that sort of thing. So fried foods and sweet tea. And you can see that the mortalities were definitely significantly much higher for people with a more southern diet, though I would probably just call that more of a standard American diet at this point. So probably one of the best studied nutrition plans as its impacts on health are concerned is the Mediterranean diet. And so a lot of studies have looked into this particular type of nutrition plan. And what we find is that there's considerable improvement in overall mortalities. This is an endpoint of acute myocardial infarction, stroke, and cardiovascular death. Clearly has a benefit to that endpoint for people that are on a Mediterranean diet, whether it's a nut predominant Mediterranean diet or extra virgin olive oil predominant Mediterranean diet. I guess where you get your fats is what they were trying to break down there. And so when you look at the Mediterranean diet and you're trying to explain that to your patients, the predominance, the big driver of that nutrition plan is a whole bunch of really unprocessed, fresh foods, fruits, vegetables, grain products, a moderate amount of fresh foods, these that are high in omega-3s, and then a much smaller contribution from red meats and sweetened foods, that sort of thing. A little bit of wine, a whole bunch of dancing. That's what makes a Mediterranean diet, I suppose. So we know that from those studies, from a primary prevention perspective, that an aggressive nutrition plan can help prevent coronary artery disease. Well, what about secondary prevention? This is a 2016 study from Europe looking at dietary patterns and studying a population of stable coronary artery disease patients. This was very similar to one of the previous studies where they took about 15,000 people, watched them for a considerable period of time, breaking them down into just dietary types. This thing took place in 39 different countries. And here's what they found is that the more Mediterranean your diet was, the less likely these stable coronary artery disease patients were to have myocardial infarctions, strokes, all-cause mortality, or cardiovascular death. So I guess we can impact people who already have cardiovascular disease. That's promising. Sounds a little bit like the dementia data, doesn't it? So here's a study looking at intensive lifestyle changes for the reversal of coronary heart disease. Hey, I know you got heart disease. Can it be reversed? I thought that was one of those chronic diseases. And so this is a study looking at aggressive lifestyle interventions. So what did that look like? So 10% fat, whole food, vegetarian diet, aerobic exercise, stress management training, smoking cessation, and group psychosocial support for a 5-year period of time. This was, again, an intervention in a control group study. What did they find? Well, what they found was, starting at baseline, both groups had very similar looking coronary artery disease. At year 1, you can see the control group continued to have worsening intraluminal stenosis of their coronary disease, and that worsened over a 5-year period of time. In the lifestyle intervention group, luminal stenosis went down over a 1 and 5-year period of time. So they were able to document a reduction and a reversal of coronary artery disease. And of course, this was primarily on the backbone of a whole food plant-based diet. So some of you may know Caldwell Esselstyn. He runs the Esselstyn Heart Disease Program for Cleveland Clinic. He did a significant amount of research looking at nutritional interventions in heart disease, oh goodness, more than 30 years ago. And what you can see here from one of his documented coronary artery disease patients, I don't think you have to be a cardiologist to look at this coronary and know this is the one you don't want to have. But over a 3-year period of time with nutritional interventions, this person was able to reestablish considerable amount of blood flow. And today, you go out to Cleveland Clinic and join that heart disease program. This is their primary intervention. So we only had time today to talk about nutrition and exercise, and of course, each one of these pillars is extremely important to our overall health, but we got to leave something for further discussion, right? So just so that I can leave us on a really exciting up note, I'd really like to introduce you to Alfredo Aliaga. So this gentleman last November got into the newspaper because he, at the age of 92, had just hiked the Grand Canyon rim to rim. It was a great article. He was quoted as saying he loved it. He was definitely coming back for his 93rd birthday to do it again. And here he is in his trail shoes, his hiking pants, he's got his backpack. I love everything about this. And so when you think about, the patients that we see with chronic illnesses and the quality of their function, the quality of their life, and you compare that to somebody like Alfredo here, who is robustly living their best life at 92, I think that we really have our work cut out for us in helping people improve their health span. And there's a lot of research and a lot of tools available to us to be able to provide those to our patients. So I really want to encourage us to be aware of this information and bring it to our patients, because it's really exciting to be able to help them reverse and improve a lot of these chronic diseases, as well as the overall function and quality of their life. With that being said, I've run out of studies and interesting things to share with you for today. If you have any questions at all, please reach out to me. I'd love to talk to you about lifestyle medicine interventions and what I do with my primary care patients. And I hope you guys have an amazing conference, and I'll see you guys next year.